Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service. I'm Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom, and I'm honored to serve First Church as their senior minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all you're bringing with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We'd like to pay a special welcome to guests who are joining us today. If you're visiting us for the first time or joining us from afar, why don't you say hello in the chat right now and tell us where you're joining us from. I welcome everyone in to our worship service by inviting you all to repeat our First Church mission after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. Our opening words this morning are the poem, The Shopper, by Naomi Shihab Nye. I visit the grocery store like the Indian woman in Peru attends the cathedral, saying a few words over and over. Butter, bread, apples. Butter, bread, apples. I nod to the grandmothers muttering among roots. Their carts tell stories. They eat little. They live alone. Last week, 2 women compared their cancers matter-of-factly as I compare soups. How do you reach that point of acceptance? Life and death shoved in the same basket, and you with a calm face waiting at the checkout stand. We must bless ourselves with peaches. Pray to the eggplant silent among her sisters that the seeds will not be bitter on the tongue. We must confess our fears to the flesh of tomato. We too go forward, only halfway ripened, dreaming of deeper red. Let's go now to our beloved sanctuary to light the chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism.
Hello, my name is Paul Kozadowski, and I'm honored to be your worship associate today. In this time of hardship, I'd like to tell you about 3 events in my life that have taught me about ambiguity and loss. My maternal grandfather died in April 1989. George Koch was a remarkable, gentle man. He never graduated high school, but he eventually became the plant manager of one of the largest steel foundries in the state. After a good life, he died a good death. Our family gathered at his modest lower flat and attended him and each other as he declined from ALS. I got to sit with him privately and tell him all that he had meant to me. The mourning was tempered with pride and gratefulness. I had been part of his wonderful and full life. Not all losses are surrounded with that blend of sorrow and grace. When my youngest sister died of cancer a few years ago, we were enmeshed in a cycle of bad feeling that was never resolved before she passed. Our failure to connect still haunts me. Right now, I'm experiencing a different kind of loss. My sister Anne, who was born with Down syndrome, has been afflicted with Alzheimer's dementia for 3 years now. I've been her primary live-in caretaker since March, and over the last 6 months, I've been witness to her decline and struggled with the challenge of finding some of the joy and connection we shared before the disease. This means indulging in Anne's go-to pleasures, playing a game of bingo or an old Wheel of Fortune computer game, sharing a treat of chocolate ice cream. It also means accepting Anne's frequent descents into mysterious and often debilitating sadness, or her erratic, obsessive-compulsive behaviors. They often thwart my attempts to relive some shared joys. A trip to the zoo or a walk on the lakeshore becomes all about tying and retying shoelaces. After any challenge or loss, the question that often lingers is, did I do enough? Closure is hard. When these events linger, they linger with an ambiguous feeling of what if. Did I spend enough time with my grandfather, or try hard enough to repair the relationship with my sister before she died of cancer? My time with Anne, now that it's coming to a close, has indeed triggered a sometimes painful self-examination. Did I muster enough patience and energy to help ease the hardship of her decline? Can I forgive myself for the moments of exasperation and lost temper? I embrace the possibility of helping her through these challenging 6 months, but did I do everything possible? I expect those questions will linger as well. When they do, I hope I can answer with a kind of radical acceptance of her disease-driven behaviors or the challenges of caretaking and of my ability or failures to respond with patience and kindness. Appropriately, Anne herself helps me get through these ambiguous feelings, drawing on some uncanny mental telepathy or perhaps supernatural grace. The day before she will move into her new group home, she gets up unsteadily from her chair and says she needs to tell me something. She walks over to me, hugs me, and says, "You're the best brother I ever had." It's something of a mantra with her. She's said it many times before. At this moment, however, it touches my heart in a way that I couldn't anticipate. It cuts through the doubts and pains, those feelings that linger after any challenging crisis, and reminds me that for all of the ambiguity and questioning and pain, I was able to help Anne get through another day.
In the novel, This Tender Land, author William Kent Kruger tells the story of a young orphan trying to survive in the 1930s. After their father is killed, the protagonist of the story, Odie O'Banion, and his older brother Albert were sent to the Lincoln Indian boarding school for Native American children. Similar to real-life boarding schools, the children at Lincoln had been removed from their homes and sent to the boarding school to have their culture erased. Also, similar to real-life Native American boarding schools, the children at Lincoln are abused and depend on one another to survive the cruelties of the adults around them. Odie and Albert are the only white children at the school, ostensibly taken there because of proximity and need. And they experience how brutal the United States government's campaign to kill the Indian, save the man was on real human children. The novel includes many of the horrors we know happened in these US government-sponsored, religion-run boarding schools. Negligence, physical and sexual abuse, murder. The one adult in Odie's life who is kind to him is a teacher at the school named Mrs. Frost. She does her best to resist the worst of the school's cruelties and provide some shelter from the systems set up to harm the children. When Odie and his best friend Mose are sent to do the hot, itchy, painful work of threshing the wheat at the farm next door to the school, Mrs. Frost comes to pull them for another task. She feeds them, gives them lemonade, and lets them sit in the shade and play in the river. Then she tells them the most glorious news they've heard since their parents' deaths. She's planning on adopting Odie and his brother Albert and their best friend Mose and bringing them all to live with her and her young daughter Emmy on their farm. The boys are thrilled. Their hopes for home and safety and love and family finally coming true. But a few days later, a tornado hits, tearing up the land and homes in their small town and forcing the kids to run for shelter. Even though she got her young daughter into the cellar, Mrs. Frost is killed trying to save the animals. Her daughter, Emmy, is sent to live with the headmistress of the school, the most abusive adult around. Odie and Albert, Mose and Emmy decide to run away from this terrible place. They take a canoe and they flee on the Gilead River. As the four young people navigate down the river, they float in the dangerous, powerful space between what was and who they will become. Their past is gone, and while they had been living in systems that harmed them, even Odie admits there was a comforting regularity to it. They knew what to expect, and even when it was a bad they knew. Now out in the wilderness, Odie and his friends don't know what to expect, ever. And even though they hold out hope for something better, for belonging and for safety and for love and for home, sometimes what they encounter out in the wilderness is worse than what they knew before. Right now, we are all living in liminal space, floating between what was before and what is yet to come. And my goodness, many of us are so tired of it. It is too much uncertainty, too much change. Haven't we been floating in this in-between space long enough? It feels like forever. And I, for one, am so over it. Even though the before times of this pandemic had some of us squished in systemic oppression, whether that was being in the hamster wheel of underpaid jobs and rising expenses, or suffering from racism and white supremacy, or living queerly in straight space, or having bodies starting to function differently in a world designed for bodies that don't, or struggling isolated to raise children when it takes a whole village of care. At least we knew the rules of the old world. We knew how to navigate and compensate and deflect and push through, even when it was hard. We don't know what world is coming. Is it the beautiful dream of finally coming home to real belonging, to equity, to love and kindness? Or is it a world that is worse than what we knew before, where inequalities and divisions are more entrenched and suffering is greater? We don't know yet. And liminal space is a hard place to live. When Odie and his makeshift family run from the boarding school in the middle of the night with the authorities at their heels, he takes a dangerous risk to pause their flight and go get a can of red paint from the school shed. Odie risks his life and his freedom to climb the local water tower and paint in bright red, "God is a tornado." Later in the book, Odie's talking with a walking paradox of a man who's sometimes kind and sometimes cruel, who feeds the children chicken dinner, but also locks them in a shed, who laughs and dances with them and also threatens them. This is a man haunted by his own pain, but who also has moments of poignancy and wisdom. He tells Odie he's never been much of a churchgoer because you can't keep God penned up under one roof. "Ask me," the man says in the book, "God's right here. In the dirt, in the rain, the sky, the trees, the apples, the stars hidden in the cottonwoods, in you and in me too. It's all connected and it's all God." Sure, this is hard work, but it's good work because it's part of what connects us to this land, to this beautiful, tender land. Odie responds to him, "This land spawned a tornado that killed Emmy's mother. You call that tender?" "Tragic, that's what I call it," the man says. "But don't blame the land. The land's what it always been, and tornadoes have been part of that since the beginning. Drought, too, and grasshoppers and hail and wildfire and everything that's ever driven folks off or killed them. The land is what it is. God is what God is. You and me, we are what we are. None of it's perfect, or hell, maybe it all is, and we're just not wise enough to see it." Carl Jung called paradox one of our most valuable spiritual possessions. He said, only paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. In paradox, we can see the fullness of life, the truth that embracing possibility means opening ourselves not just to our dreams, but also to grave danger and terrible loss. Change can be both good and truly awful. But this is not just the truth of change, it is the truth of life. For every moment that we live, we change. Every interaction we have, we change. Every breath we take, we change. Change is both growth and death. It is living and dying simultaneously. It is the unfolding of life in which death is already embedded. Paradox is at the core of life and death, embedded in them and in their relationship to each other. In the 1993 novel, Parable of the Sower, author Octavia Butler asserts that God is change. In her apocalyptic dystopia of the 2023 United States, where ecological, social, and biological crises combine, a young Black girl named Lauren Olamina writes a new moral code she calls Earthseed, the books of the living. The central tenet of Earthseed is that God is change, and while change cannot be avoided, it can be influenced. She writes, God is change. God is infinite, irresistible, inexorable, indifferent. God is trickster, teacher, chaos, clay. God is change. Beware, God exists to shape and to be shaped. By partnering with change, by partnering with God, Butler says through her character, Lauren, victims of God can become shapers of God. Those who have been harmed by the paradox can influence the paradox. Lauren's theology doesn't wave a magical wand and make it all better or take the pain away, but rather points to where our power lies in it and calls on us to use it. We are part of the chaos and the clay of the world, and we can choose to add the measure of our lives to the scale on the side of love. A dear friend of mine recently shared the story of one of her college students who told her last year that she has a degenerative disease and probably only has a few more years to live. Last month, my friend got an email from her student saying that she had had a crisis when she realized her former dream of joining the diplomatic corps would take too long to complete, given her declining health. She wrote to my friend that she was so moved by the readings they did in class about the role of community health workers that she had decided to go into an accelerated nursing program so she can spend the rest of the life she has helping others. You place the measure of your life on the scale, on the side of love. You do the best you can with the time you're given, and you hope to love more, give more, create more good than any harm you've caused. This is the best we can do in this ambiguous paradox of a world, in this mortal world, in mortal bodies, loving other mortals. As Matt de la Pena wrote in our story this morning, stars shine long after they've flamed out, and the shine they shine with is love. So let us love now, give now, create good now. In the waiting room of liminality, and in the end, which always comes too soon, let our lives be measured on the scale, on the side of love. May it be so, and amen. Our closing words this morning are the poem Yes by William Stafford. It could happen anytime. Tornado, earthquake, Armageddon. It could happen. Or sunshine, love, salvation. It could, you know. That's why we wake and look out, no guarantees in this life, but some bonuses, like morning, like right now, like noon, like evening. Enjoy your bonuses, dear First Church. I love you, and I'll see you soon. Blessed be, and amen.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah.